Hello and welcome to Happiest Health webinar on reversing diabetes by diet alone. I am Kumaran and I will take you through the proceedings of this session. The webinar is powered by Stevia Stevia Sweetener. On World Diabetes Day, we are extremely glad to have on board top global experts here with us today. The soaring surge in the prevalence of diabetes and its cardiovascular comorbidities across the globe in the recent decades itself is an indicator that it's high time to tame and tackle this condition, especially type 2 diabetes. Due to its close link with metabolism and vascular conditions, diabetes have now emerged as an umbrella term over a long list of multi-organ health conditions ranging from blood pressure to cardiac and renal complications. The 10th edition of Diabetes Atlas, compiled by the International Diabetes Federation, IDF, states that at least 537 million adults between the age group of 20 and 79 are living with diabetes across the world. This is projected to soar up to 783 million by 2045 if left unaddressed. As per their data, 90% of these cases are type 2 diabetes. At least 541 million people are also diagnosed with glucose intolerance or pre-diabetes in 2021. The silver lining on the dark diabetes cloud is the fact that type 2 diabetes could be put in remission through sustained lifestyle alterations. It is no coincidence that some of the countries, including China and India, with a dietary pattern heavily based on carbohydrates and processed food items, are vying for the top slots in the diabetes Olympics. But how do you achieve remission and manage this condition on a day-to-day basis? Is it all about adopting a healthy lifestyle, or is there more to it? We have our esteemed panel with us today to share more aspects on this journey. We have with us Padma Bhushan and BC Roy awardee Dr. Amrish Mittal. He is the chairman and head of endocrinology and diabetes department of Max Healthcare Hospitals. He is the domain expert on the governing board of National Health Authority 2019 of India and president of AIIMS Gorakhpur. Recently, he was presented with Laureate Award from Endocrine Society of US for International Excellence. Dr. Mittal has been the recipient of the Fogarty Fellowship, Harvard Medical School, Japan, International Cooperation Agency Fellowship, Boyframe Award of the ASBMR, IOF Amgen Health Professionals Award, and the Springer Citation Prize for his paper on Global Vitamin D Status 2013. He has received the IOF President's Award 2016. His current research interests include vitamin D nutrition, primary hyperparathyroidism, osteoporosis, cardiovascular outcome trials in diabetes and NAFLD. We welcome you, Dr. Amrish Mittal. Next up, we have Dr. Vijay Vishwanathan, who comes with 3 decades as a diabetologist and is a head and chief diabetologist, MV Hospital for Diabetes, and Professor M. Vishwanathan, Diabetes Research Center, Royapuram, Chennai. He is the first non-European president of D-Food International, based in Belgium and consisting of experts in diabetic food 2021-2023. He is a national vice president, RSSDI, Research Society for Study of Diabetes in India, 2019 to 2022. He is PhD in diabetic nephropathy from Tamil Nadu Dr. MGR Medical University in 1999. He is a recipient of the first Vivian Foncia Award from the American Diabetes Association for the research paper on diabetes and TB in 2013. His research interests include prevention of diabetes and its complications, and he has published over 300 research papers in peer-reviewed journals. We welcome you, Dr. Vijay Vishwanathan. Next up with us, we have Ms. Kavita Devgan, is a prominent nutritionist and weight management consultant who offers customized programs via habit modifications. Her programs aim to offer long-term results and complete well-being of the client. Kavita is also an eminent writer, columnist, and author of best-selling books like Don't Diet, 50 Habits of Thin People, Ultimate Grandmother Hacks, 50 kick-ass traditional habits for a fitter you, Fix It with Foods, and the Don't Diet Plan. Her books have been endorsed by celebrities, medical experts, and prominent personalities like former Indian captain Kapil Dev, executive chairperson and founder of Biocon Limited, Kiran Majumdar-Shaw, and Pulitzer Prize-winning author and oncologist Dr. Siddharth Mukherjee. Chairman and founder of Narayana Health, Dr. Devi Shetty, endorsed her latest book, The Immunity Diet, published in April this year, saying Kavita walks us through the essential steps in nutrition and lifestyle to build a robust immunity. Kavita has over 25 years of experience in the field of nutrition and well-being. We welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you.
We also will have with us in a short while Isabel Edwards. She's from New York, state strategy advocate for the prevention and control of diabetes. She's diagnosed with diabetes in 1993. Isabel has faced several challenges and health complications like obesity, partial amputation, gastroparesis, heart attacks, but has overcome them like a diva. After witnessing the inequalities and challenges faced by disabled community, as a member herself, she decided to be their voice. She became a keynote speaker and type 2 diabetes advocate for the American Diabetes Association and Canadian Diabetes Association. She travels across the country sharing her story, and there is no doubt why she's popularly known as the diabetes diva. She proudly says, "I can't help it, I'm 70s kid." We are all about peace, joy, and happiness. With this, we will now move on to the panel discussion. This session will be moderated by my co-host, Revati Rajivan. Over to you, Revati.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much once again for joining this panel today on World Diabetes Day. To set the tone of the discussion, we'd like to first understand the reasons behind the sudden explosion in the number of diabetics around the world. Dr. Amrish, what, according to you, are the factors for this?
Yeah.
Right. While we wait to Dr. Amrish, Dr. Vijay, my question to you is, a lot of people are switching to carb-free, protein-heavy diet for diabetes remission. Is this advisable? How does it affect the other conditions and organs like kidneys?
Right. So the carb diet has been in vogue for a long time in India. And I don't think we Indians can exist without carbs for a long time. We can do it on a short-term basis. However, having said that, more than a year, Indians cannot exist without carbs. I mean, you can't cut off carbs completely from your diet. Sorry, sir, I'm taking the question in your absence.
Yeah, I've appeared, but Vijay, you go ahead, please.
So if carb-free diet can be done by people who are extremely obese or pre-diabetics, but if you cut off completely carbs and you take insulin and you take sulfonylureas, which are still practiced in India, you will go into a state of hypoglycemia. So I think it's not sensible for somebody who is having type 2 diabetes to go off carbs completely. Even if he's obese, you can cut down the carbs from 65% to 50%, but you cannot go completely off carbohydrate. So I think in a place like South India, if you're talking about a carb-free diet, and the entire family is taking carbohydrate, sitting around you, I think it's not practical, and it looks sort of impossible to have a carb-free diet for a long time.
Dr. Amrish, this was my first question to you and we lost connection. I'd like to repeat that question. The reasons behind the sudden explosion in the number of diabetics around the world, what, according to you, are the factors?
So as we are all aware, there has been a surge in diabetes across the world, as you rightly mentioned, and in particular in South Asia, that countries like India, where they have seen an exponential growth in the number of cases of diabetes and the prevalence of diabetes. Now, what exactly is fueling this change in diabetes? Why are we getting more and more people get sort of affected by type 2 diabetes? And we're talking primarily of type 2 diabetes, unless I specify my statements refer to type 2 diabetes. Now, because there's no remission in type 1 diabetes that we can do anything about. Okay, so that's very important. So this is type 2 diabetes. So type 2 diabetes seems to have increased worldwide and particularly in India quite simply because of changes in our lifestyle, changes in our body weight. What we sometimes don't realize is the direct connection between our body weight, in particular central obesity, and the risk of getting diabetes. And also in management, the fact that if you lose weight, you can do a lot to improve your diabetes. So overall, our body weights in particular parts of India, especially, are going up consistently. School children the prevalence of obesity in school children has definitely gone up. No question about that. You never used to find so many obese children in school. If you just did a simple survey of Delhi schools, you would find that in the more preppy private schools, you would find that the proportion of children who are overweight or even obese is very high, but overweight is very, very high, right? Whereas it's the same thing you did in a government subsidized school for EWS, you would find very, very few number of patients, children there who are overweight. So what I'm trying to say is our genes are the same. It is our lifestyle that has caused weight gain, and that weight gain has led to diabetes. So one important point here, when we say lifestyle, it's a pretty vague term. So the point I'd like to make here is that when in the late 80s, there was this talk of fats and cholesterol being the worst thing for humans, the whole world shifted to a carb-rich diet. So we used carbohydrates to replace fats rather than good fats to replace bad fats. And so therefore, even in the medical fraternity, it became pretty okay to have carb-rich diets. The people didn't worry so much so long as there wasn't too much fat there. But over the years, we've realized that in any case, Indian diets are very carbohydrate rich. But at the same time, the fact that we have advised people to replace fats in their diet subconsciously or otherwise, and have given some acceptance to carbohydrates, except for the last, say, 10 years, that is not there. But before that, it was like that. I think the science has also has a role to play in this. And one last point is that Indians have always had a carb-rich diet. Vijay was mentioning that. We all know that. Why South Indian? Yes, rice-based, North Indian wheat-based, but it's always carb-rich. The issue is that we used to have complex carbohydrate-rich diets, and now we have refined carbohydrate-rich diets. So the access to refined processed carbs, processed food has increased dramatically. This is a direct reflection of economic development. And even within India, when you look at the INDIAB study, and I think Vijay was involved in that, if you look at the INDIAB study, you would find that within India, in cities or regions which have developed faster economically, the prevalence of diabetes has gone up. And areas that are still relatively more rural, it hasn't gone up that much. So these are the basic reasons, of course. And again, last point, again, I'm saying last point again is that of course, to all this, we have to add the fact that there is reduced physical activity in urban India. As economic development happens, people move to cities, they get used to all these amenities, they get used to, driving around on their two-wheelers or cars or whatever, but their physical activity goes down. So all this put together.
Dr. Amrish, you sort of covered a part of my next question as well about especially refined carbs, etc. But I want to ask, does including fiber help in any way in that case?
Yes, of course. So when we talk of complex carbohydrates, I think adding fiber is a critical part of it. Adding fiber makes a big difference to the speed at which glucose is absorbed, or food is absorbed as glucose. It flattens that curve out. It overall reduces absorption of some other nutrients. It actually is a very, very important constituent of diets, which has been removed by modernization and urbanization. So you can take the example of wheat. Wheat, in the village, it still has choker in it, choker, that bran. And that is all removed very carefully before it is marketed to make it palatable to the urban modern Indian. So as a result, the wheat that we are eating is actually devoid of all the choker. choker. In Hindi we write choker. And when that is not there, then that is processing. Basically, you've gone. The rice husk, brown rice, and all those things have changed. So that's why we are getting this.
Right, Dr. Amrish. My next question to you, Ms. Kavita. What is the most challenging aspect of charting an ideal and simple diet for diabetics?
Charting a diet is challenging for anybody, especially when it comes to diabetics, definitely, because there are more constraints. It definitely gets more challenging. So I agree there, and I'll take you up on that question. The first biggest problem that I'm sure everyone faces while charting a diet is the fact that you need to explain to people that agreed, you are on the medicine, you're having the medicine, but that does not mean that you can eat anything and everything after that. So just making this whole point clear to them becomes such a task. Once they get this, it becomes easier. So that is first, because everyone has this idea that, okay, I'm already on the medicine for sugar, so it's a free for all. Now I can eat anything. So that needs to be, first of all, challenged and explained well. The second challenge I feel, which I see with a lot of my patients, is the fact that most of them are very poor breakfast eaters. So I personally feel for a diabetic, eating a very high-powered, high-protein breakfast is a big win, because that helps them keep their blood sugar stable. So converting a person from being a poor eater to a good breakfast eater, which has a bit of all, some good fats, some complex carbohydrates, and also good protein, good quality protein, that's the second challenge I often find, a bit of a challenge with most people. And of course, protein education is important. It's very, very important to tell them why protein is important. We are so, as Dr. Was already mentioning earlier, that Dr. Vijay, that, the fact is that we are a carbohydrate eating population. We've always eaten like that, and protein has never been given the importance that it should have been. But if you're a diabetic, it becomes even more important and challenging to ensure that you fit in enough protein in all your meals. So that is often my second challenge that I find a little difficult to get people around to.
Right, Kavita. Of course, challenges as far as diet is concerned, and challenge, of course, as far as the notion among diabetics are also concerned. Before I move to the next question, I'll quickly take a second to let you all know that we have over 200 people listening to this discussion at this period of time. Dr. Amrish, my next question to you is, there's a popular notion among diabetics that there is no escaping it once you get it. So is type 2 diabetics management a lifelong process?
Yes, I think you're absolutely right, because when patients are first diagnosed with diabetes, they think it's a life sentence, in the sense that you're forever stuck in that cage and you can't break out of it, and all the good things in your life are just gone. It's a challenge to sometimes explain to patients and convince them not to be negative. So it is true that type 2 diabetes is a progressive condition. And whatever leads to it, like especially if there are issues with the beta cell function, it does get worse over a period of time. It doesn't really dramatically improve, because that's the nature of the beast. That's how it is. However, most people who get diabetes, especially at a young age, maybe 30, 35, 25, and are within the first few years of that, and are overweight or obese. And most of the young patients who get diabetes, not all, but most of the young patients who come with diabetes are obese or overweight. So if you're a young person and you've just got diabetes and you also have a BMI of 30 and you're leading a stressful life and all the diet things you talked about, if at that point you can significantly alter your diet and lifestyle, in the sense that if you can knock off those extra kilograms, there is a good chance you may be able to reverse diabetes. Now, reversal is a wrong term. We should say inducing remission in diabetes. This reversal is not exactly correct because we don't know long term what's going to happen. But if you want to think about it like that, supposing you weigh 90 kilograms and your ideal weight is 70 kilograms, okay? And you were diagnosed with diabetes, with a high blood sugar, with a high HbA1c. You went for a routine check because your company asked you to do that, and suddenly all this turned up. If you can seriously address that and lose about 10, 12 kilograms of body weight, there is a very good chance that you may actually at least go into remission for some time with regard to your diabetes. And we have plenty of examples. This has become a buzzword now, but it wasn't anything big. We never thought of it. Vijay is here. We never thought that it's a big deal because there were many patients of ours who within the first few years of diagnosis were able to go off medicine within the first few months itself. Some did not need to start it even. But the reason was that if you focus on bringing your body weight as close to normal as possible, you can go into remission. Now, there are a lot of studies from the UK and other places which have shown that a very low calorie diet, which is like an 800 calorie diet, which is not easy. 800 calorie diet requires medical supervision. If you do that for a few weeks, followed by a little better diet, Roy Taylor studies have shown that you induce remission in a fairly high percentage, and that remains till like 2 years, or there's data for 2 years at least. So all that is good. That is research. But if you suddenly jump at that study and say, I'm going to go on 800 calories from tomorrow, you can ask Kavita how difficult that is. 800 calorie diet is not practical. So what we say, what endocrinologists, what diabetologists, what we tell our patient is, it doesn't matter. It's not 800 calories that's sacrosanct. That's for research purposes. The idea is that you should tailor your lifestyle now to suit your body and your health, and try and knock off roughly 10% of your body weight. And by and large, if you do that, you'll be either inducing a remission or coming close to it. So I think that there is no magic in inducing remission in diabetes. Of course, now technology has helped us a lot. A lot of technology is going into this. You get devices that give you all the data about different foods. You can patch something on here on your tummy. It will give you data about the spikes and lows and everything. You can monitor all your parameters all day long. And based on that, there are apps that actually calculate what is required for you, how to customize your diet. So that adds to it. But that, of course, makes a difference. But by and large, following the basic principles that people like Kavita will tell you in a diet chart, and I hate the word diet chart. Yeah. It's like a prescription. There should be no prescription in diets, just some advice. Yeah. And if you follow that, and if you lose weight, then you can very likely, I can't say very likely, but some proportion of us will be able to reverse our diabetes if it's within the first 5 to 10 years of onset. So young patient, first 5 to 10 years, overweight or obese patient, willing to follow all the guidance, the chances of reversal are good. Chances of remission are good.
Remission, yeah. Right, doctor. Thank you for putting the point across that more than reversal, it's called remission as such we need to address. We've also had having over 200 participants who are also sending in questions, and we also encourage the participants to send in questions if there are anything that we need to take it up to the panelists. We will do that. Next up, we will go with Dr. Vijay.
Dr. Vijay, our next question is, how important is insulin resistance in management of type 2 diabetes? Are certain people more prone to the condition?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Revati. So insulin resistance exists in people who are pre-diabetics. Insulin resistance exists in people who are already known diabetics. So it is there at least 5 to 10 years before one is diagnosed with diabetes. Insulin resistance is the harbinger for many complications like diabetes and atherosclerotic heart disease and so on. Now, insulin resistance has complex formulae like the HOMA model and so on. But if you want a simple test to know whether somebody is insulin resistant, look at his tummy. If he's got a big visceral adiposity and a subcutaneous adiposity, he is sure to have insulin resistance. Therefore, I think insulin resistance is an integral part of a person who's likely to develop diabetes and who's already having diabetes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vijay. I'd like to club a couple of points that both of you made and ask Ms. Kavita. Based on your professional experience, what are the most practical difficulties that diabetics face when it comes to following a healthy diet? You already mentioned that charting a diet itself, the first step itself is challenging. What are the other practical difficulties?
Yeah, so Revati, you see, we've already been discussing this point right from the beginning, right from the time Dr. Vijay mentioned about the carbohydrates and the impossibility of completely going off them. And then Dr. Ambrish mentioned about, how it's not the carbs which are the enemy. It is the kind of, I would just like to take it further from there, that this is the biggest practical issue. We are a country or people of extremes, One day carbs are all good for us. And then suddenly when you get diabetes, the message that people get is that all carbs are bad for you. They are your enemy. That needs to be busted. Not all carbs are our enemies, because we cannot exist without carbs. Our body cannot exist without carbs. Diabetes or non-diabetes, immaterial. The fact is that it is very important to understand that not all carbs are bad and to be able to choose the carbs which are good for us. Otherwise, it leads to a lot of confusion, and then the diet is not sustainable. And if the diet is not sustainable, then there's no point in trying to follow something for 2 days and not for the rest 5 days of the week. So this is one practical problem, trying to explain to people that you do not have to go off carbs completely, but choose your carbs properly and definitely not eat the amount of carbs that you were eating earlier, and cut it down to size. Do not go off it, but cut it down to size. That is extremely, extremely important for adherence to diet, first of all. Second most important thing is, which is the most common rule for anybody, the refined grains completely out and use complex grains in its place. The moment this change is made, this one change is made, the diet on its whole becomes a very healthy diet and helps a diabetic manage its sugar much, much better. So this is where I personally feel the solution lies in grain rotation. Because the moment you start rotating your grains, you're not dependent on just one kind of grain, which could be wheat for somebody or rice for somebody. And you try and get in millets and keep having them by rotation, like about 3 to 4 grains every week by rotation. That changes the whole complex carbohydrate ratio in your diet, and you get more fiber, better carbohydrates, and it takes care of the problem of cutting down carbs to size to quite an extent. Here, personally, I have 2 favorites. One is oats, because of it being very high in magnesium, which helps in, helps the body use the glucose better. And the second is barley, this underrated grain, which has a lot of soluble fiber. Dr. Ambrish was mentioning about fiber. This particular kind of fiber is a very, very, it's in fact a gift for diabetics. I personally feel barley for diabetics could be a wonder grain, which can help them keep their blood sugar levels in check. And then, of course, the most important rule that everyone needs to understand, especially diabetics, I would specify, since we are talking about them here, is to always, always combine your carbohydrate with some protein. It should never be a just carbohydrate meal. The moment you combine your carbohydrate with the protein, the way it has traditionally always been done, dal, chawal, khichdi, they're all combinations of carbs and protein. The moment you do that, you are able to cut down the glucose release level in the body, in the blood, to quite an extent. It can be slowed down extensively. So this is one big practical change, or I would say a challenge again, which one needs to really bring about. And the second one is that, again, like Dr. Mittal said, everyone thinks it's in life sentence the moment they come to know that they have diabetes and they have to go off sweets completely. That's again a big wrong notion. In fact, no one has to go completely off sweets. Everyone can, even diabetics, can manage to fit in a small amount of sweets here and there. But the portion, how, when, and where of it needs to be specified and adhered to. So the whole idea that now I just can't eat sweets makes people eat sweets even more. So the moment they understand that, yes, they can fit it in their diet, but of course, with sticking to the limits that need to be specified, this, I feel, is a very, very important bit of food education that is missing, which we really need to give people. And then it won't seem like a life sentence at all to anybody.
Right, Kavita. I think that's also bursting myths among certain people that, the blanket ban on carbs, saying carbs are bad, or going completely carb-free, which you've all mentioned that is not possible, to take out one certain component completely out of your diets. Choose your carbs wisely. There are good carbs, bad carbs. Choose your carbs is what you've rightly pointed out. Dr. Amrish, there are also concerns regarding certain other conditions when it comes to diabetics. Why do diabetics tend to develop bone frailty, reduction in bone strength, and osteoporosis? Should older diabetics take additional precautions before opting for a special diet and exercise?
Dr.
You asked one of my favorite topics, favorite subjects. And quite clearly, yes, there is an increasing understanding that people with diabetes have a greater risk of fragility fractures. But that's been shown in type 1. Again, we're not talking about that so much today. Type 2 diabetes, the risk is between 1.5 to 2 times, right? So we never thought of this. You can ask Vijay, 10 years ago, we hardly spoke about all this. But quite clearly, data has emerged which suggests that people with diabetes tend to get fracture at a better bone density and at a younger age than people without diabetes, right? So what do we say? We say that people with diabetes who've had at least 10 years of diabetes, some people say it's 5, but you can say 10 years of diabetes, and above the age of 50 should get a bone density done. And within the bone density, we suggest slightly different criteria for people with diabetes versus those who are not, the normal criteria. So we do say that people should address their bone strength, which means adequate nutrition, appropriate exercise to build bones. Otherwise, the risk of getting, why are we talking all this? Risk of fragility fracture means what? The risk of fragility fracture means that after menopause, a wrist fracture, undiagnosed, a spinal compression, and most importantly, in older age, a hip fracture. A hip fracture is a disastrous consequence of frail bones, of fragile bones. And a hip fracture is commoner in people with diabetes. Now, therefore, those who have diabetes, and if they're over 50, and if they had diabetes for 10 years, definitely, they should get a bone density done, ask their doctor about advice what to do, and if required, even take appropriate medication in the same way as you take medication for cholesterol or blood pressure. Somebody may say, why should I take medicine for bone density? It's not causing me anything. The issue is that it's a great predictor of future fractures. So you need to take medication now, exactly as cholesterol predicts heart attacks. So you may or may not need medication, but if you do, please make sure that you follow that. But short of the medication, you have to make sure your diet and exercise is okay, and you have to maintain your calcium and vitamin D intakes, which means dairy products should not be banned, because the whole thing about dairy now in India, everything is bad about dairy. So again, it has to be customized. Dairy products, if they suit you, you're not lactose intolerant. Dairy products contain calcium and protein. Both are good for you. There are some, but very few non-dairy sources of calcium in our diet. Remember that. The other important point here is that almost all urban Indians, or the vast majority at least, those who work in offices, those were sort of white-collar jobs, as we all are, they basically have low vitamin D. And if you have a low vitamin D, you cannot absorb your calcium. So you need to make enough dairy, and make sure enough dairy is there. You need to make sure you have enough vitamin D. Don't overdose yourself. I've written a lot about the correct dose. Make sure, however, that you have enough vitamin D. There is very little vitamin D in the diet, except if the food is fortified, which is now getting available, beginning to get available, and beginning to be available in many parts of India. But otherwise, the source has to be a supplement, because the other source is sunlight. And while sunlight is the best source of vitamin D by far, often people like me don't have access to sunlight. Now, right now you see me, and this sun rays are crossing us, and they're hitting my face. But that's through the glass. Yeah. And when it comes through the glass, we don't make enough vitamin D, remember. So it's important that we have direct sunlight exposure, which for many working individuals is very difficult. Therefore, ask your doctor for the correct dose of supplement.
Right, Dr. Amrish, soak in the sun, get that vitamin D as much as you can. You've addressed one aspect of the health concerns as far as bone density or bone health goes. I'd like to ask Dr. Vijay, as far as the neuropathic complications go, what's the link between diabetes and diabetic neuropathy, and what additional precautions must people take if they have neuropathic complications?
The neuropathy is a condition where the sensation...
Dr. Vijay, I believe you're mute.
No, I'm not muted. You can't hear me?
I can hear.
Yes,
So
please go ahead.
Neuropathy is a condition where the sensation in the feet are lost. It is related to even lower blood sugars. So I reported in the Neurology India that 19.7% of pre-diabetics have neuropathy. So there is a very early onset of neuropathy. To get the myelin sheath from the nerves being lost, you don't need very high blood sugars. So blood sugars in the range of 160 to 200 is enough. So number two, along with the University of Michigan, we have shown that HDL cholesterol, triglycerides are also very important to lose the myelin sheath. So pre-diabetics have a very high potential of getting neuropathy. People with diabetes, as the duration increases, also get neuropathy. Therefore, to prevent neuropathy, you should start diagnosing neuropathy at a very early stage. At a very early stage, even during pre-diabetes and at the onset of diabetes, not after 10 years after you become diabetic. And once you lose sensation in the feet, you cannot get it back. Whatever you do, you can, people in India give methylcobalamin, alpha-lipoic acid. Whatever you do, your sensation will not be got back. Especially the A-alpha fibers, the small fibers, C fibers, are damaged very early, and you cannot get back your sensation. Temperature sensation is lost, and pain is supposed to be a gift to mankind. That pain sensation is lost. So you have to treat diabetes and the triglycerides, HDL, properly to prevent neuropathy. Thank you.
Right, Dr. Vijay. Ms. Kavita, this is something you have mentioned earlier in detail about how people think a certain carbs are bad or carbs are completely bad. And there's also this common notion that sugar is responsible for diabetes, that the lack of awareness in many. How does one go about creating that awareness? Is there a need for a calorie awareness among people?
Revati, yeah, of course, there is some awareness now about the role of carbs. There has been a lot of talk about it, about carbs and protein. Not enough, I would say, but definitely some inroads have been made. So some awareness about the role of carbohydrates is there in some people, but still, I think most people consider just sugar as the enemy. So they think that if you eat a lot of sugar, as if sugar and carbohydrates are separate, they aren't. But then most people make that distinction. They think sugar is a different entity and carbs are a different entity. So this whole notion that sugar is also a kind of carb and there are other carbs as well, which could be dangerous, needs to be clarified. And, this message has to just percolate down. It's very, very important, because it's not as sweet as simple as this, that you just cut down the sugar in your chai and you'll do fine. No, it doesn't work like that. It's the other sources of sugar, hidden sources also that need to be considered. Now, who and when one gets diabetes depends on many factors, as Dr. Mittal also mentioned. Lifestyle, which of course is vague, but still people understand. Your weight, very, very important. I mean, that's one thing I've seen that can actually help in remission extensively. So if there's one thing you want to do, cut down on your weight and get as near your optimum weight as possible. So that's the second. Activity level, of course, extremely important, whether you're sedentary or you're active, moderately or high. Genetics definitely play a role, but as Dr. Mittal already explained, giving that lovely example of children, obese children in private schools and not so overweight children in government schools, it becomes a little more clearer that it is an important factor, but not the only important factor. So it's not like I cannot escape diabetes. Even if you have a family history of diabetes, we know people who manage to do extremely well and keep it away for a long, long time. Stress, that would need a complete webinar of its own if we start talking about it. And eating habits, your food, extremely important. So this definition of carbohydrates needs to be, I would reiterate, a little more clearer to people. Very, very important. You'll be very surprised. Even today, a lot of people forget carbs, can't distinguish between what is a carb-rich food and what is a protein-rich food. So very often I hear that I am eating enough protein. I'm having roti sabzi in every meal. So the fact is that understanding of the macros also is not that clear. So it's not just carbs alone. This has to be a complete, awareness education that needs to be done. That's the need of the hour. And it is very, very important, of course, to make people aware about eating calories. How many calories to eat is important. But at the same time, importance of quality calories is even more important. Like Dr. Mittal was mentioning, that 800 calorie diet, even I would reiterate, cannot be done alone on their own. It has to be under supervision, can help people to go into remission. But the fact is that the moment you tell somebody 800 calories, you can't just leave it there. You have to tell them 800 quality calories. So they need to understand where those 800 or 1200 or 1600 calories that they're eating are coming from. Because more than the number, it's the quality here, which is extremely important. So we need a complete education. We don't just need like a small bit of education about just carbs or something. We need to, make sure that people understand that what they're eating in whole, holistically, all of it is making a difference to their body and their health and their blood sugar levels and their blood pressure. So it's very important to do that.
Thanks, Kavita. So a balanced diet, exercise, genetic factors, it's a combination of all of them. Dr. Amrish, when it comes to these calories or exercise, all of those, there's a lot of technology also involved today, something that you mentioned earlier in passing for an earlier question. So there is better awareness among people as to how much they're eating or how much they're exercising, how many calories burnt, however accurate or not. But does it really help in managing diabetes better? Are people actioning on these?
See, we believe that it's the person who gets the disease or gets the condition, he or she has to manage it. So I think involvement or empowerment of the patient in managing their own condition is vital to the success of any chronic care program. You cannot manage diabetes by visiting a doctor, getting a prescription every few months, and then just popping your pills accordingly. You will have to make sure that you're looking at these things in a holistic manner, in a pragmatic manner in your day-to-day life. Now, what these technologies do, they actually help you to to figure out sometimes what is it, what particular diet, what particular food item is causing a surge in your sugar, what are the fluctuations, how to sort of integrate those, how to build a diet with the help of a nutritionist, which will take care of all those things. But I think it's a bit of overhype there, in the sense that for people who are not diabetic or just healthy, to keep doing this makes very little sense to me, because all you have to do is follow common sense basic advice, and not what the neighbor told you or your aunt told you, but go to a nutritionist or a specialist. Please listen to them. They'll tell you the same stuff. That it's just that it sounds very boring, because for so many years we've been saying the same thing. Everyone, all of us have been saying the same thing. Have more fiber, less refined carbohydrate, add protein, search for protein in the plate. Don't gobble down carbs without looking at the protein. So all that thing, ये तो सब पता है. इसमें क्या है? Nothing new about what you're telling us, So, and when you tag it to a lot of gadgetry and all, it becomes very exciting. So, having said that, for people who have diabetes, I find these are very useful. For people who have diabetes, when we are treating them, it gives us a lot of information about how to tailor their treatment to prevent those surges or prevent those plummeting, those drops in blood sugar. Both can be prevented very well if you have more information. The more you know, the better you can manage, which is why I think technology is playing a great role. We saw during the pandemic, technology saved us and so many of our patients, because they were able to connect, they were able to send us their readings, everything, just starting with taking a glucometer, a blood glucose by a glucometer at home, to actually doing a continuous monitoring by all these patches and devices. It has helped a lot. So for diabetics, particularly some kinds of diabetics who are on insulin or a class of drugs called sulfonylurea, these things are quite helpful. You may want to do it as a healthy person or as a pre-diabetic. It's all right, nothing wrong. You get more information, but also you cannot afford to be obsessed. What I've seen is there is a whole category of people who are obsessed about these things. They want to keep their sugars between, say, they've come up with some number they've read or heard somewhere, 80 to 120 or something. And if it's post-meal is 140, they are banging at your door, my sugars are not controlled. So I think we need to recognize those things. We shouldn't get carried away. One big problem there is the proliferation of untrained nutritionists. Kavita will bear me out on that. I'm sure it's the same in Chennai. People who have an N of 1. I experiment on myself today, and I follow a particular diet, and I become fantastic. And I become like a model, a role model and a model both. And therefore, I have now qualified to advise the whole world, because it worked for me, it's going to work for everybody. That's quite crazy. And this happens all the time. मैंने ऐसा किया, so what? The other guy is different, his physiology is different, his phenotype is different, his profession is different, his timings are different. It's not so simple. So we have to be aware when we are talking about nutrition and education, we should look for trained diabetes educators for diabetes management, and we should look for nutritionists or trained dietitians to guide us in that. There is a big challenge there, I'm telling you. This is a big thing going on in this country where everyone's following, and the experimental model is an N of 1. One case which they have solved probably themselves. And then they think, now we've got the answer.
An important takeaway there, Dr. Amrish. Remember, what works for you may not work for others, and vice versa. Each one is different, and so is the way you deal with the problems that you face. Dr. Vijay, while we talk about diet, while we talk about food, I'd like to ask this question as well, that, how does alcohol consumption affect type 2 diabetics? Does it affect them at all? And is it okay for them to continue alcohol consumption after they have been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes? Yeah. In moderation, of course.
Yeah, so alcohol is not a taboo, first point. Second point is, there are some people who will take alcohol, take the tablet and go to bed. You are prone for hypoglycemia. So there are people who skip tablets because they're taking alcohol. So that also is bad. So take alcohol, take food, and then take your insulin or tablet. So you should avoid hypoglycemia, number one. Number two, look at your liver and your triglycerides before you take alcohol. If you already have a fatty liver, NAFLD as we call it, or if your triglycerides are very high, it's better you avoid alcohol. If your triglycerides are normal, liver is normal, you are allowed to take 1 or 2 pegs of whiskey or brandy, as frequently as you want, 4 or 5 days a week. So there is no taboo on alcohol. If you're a person who enjoys alcohol, take it. But look at the other comorbid conditions like the liver, triglycerides, and so on. So it's not a blanket rule that you take alcohol. You can take alcohol. It's not a taboo. But having said that, look at other comorbid conditions. Blood pressure can go up with alcohol. So is there any other points from Dr. Ambarish or Kavita about alcohol you can add? That's all I know.
No, I'll just add
Dr.
to
Amrish.
what you said, Vijay. Because maybe it's a not sound difference, but the amount of alcohol consumed in this city and this part of the region is also very, very important.
Yeah.
So, when I tell people you can have 30 ml of whiskey, they say it's better not to live then. So one has to be sometimes, you have to sort of be over strict in your communication so that whatever they take some sort of, they won't follow it and they will be lax. So there will be some margin at least left there. So I think it's important. What you said is 100% correct, but we have to emphasize a lot on the quantity that is allowed. And also the fact that there can be a hypoglycemia, as which I mentioned, after alcohol intake, particularly if you're on certain kinds of drugs, again, like insulin or sulfonylureas, at night you may get significant hypoglycemia. And one last point there again is people say, okay, I won't have alcohol 5 days a week. On Saturday, I'll have like 200 ml of whiskey. That's pretty common for people to say that. And that's not okay. So when he said that you can have it 4 or 5 days a week, he's absolutely right. He's talking of 1 glass of wine or 30 ml of whiskey, right? There is some male-female difference. We won't go there, but let's stick to 30 ml of whiskey. And just stick to that and you'll be okay. But there are very few Indians that I know who can stick to that.
Yeah, can I also add here, because this is a common problem. The moment you give a carte blanche to them that you can have alcohol, the way Dr. Vijay mentioned, I've had serious case issues there. So even I have been extremely careful about how much I'm allowing people. Why? I'll tell you. What happens is that often I've seen that when people have had alcohol, one, they'll have a little more than what has been asked, for them to, where they've been asked to stop. And the second is their food choices after alcohol tend to become extremely damaging as well. So there also I feel, one has to be a little bit more careful. They tend to eat food that they otherwise wouldn't if they hadn't had alcohol. So these are the 2 points that I just wanted to add.
Thank you, panelists. I hope everyone listening took that piece of advice from all of you as far as alcohol consumption goes. We have several questions coming in from attendees, but before I open the floor for that, I'd like to close the discussion with one question that all of you can answer. Start with you, Dr. Vijay. Is there a need for a drastic reorientation of type 2 diabetes management strategies, especially in the post-pandemic scenario? Dr. Vijay, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think the American Diabetic Association and EASD has come up with new guidelines in 2022 by John Buse and Melanie Davis, which was published a few days ago. They say that you place the person with diabetes in the center. You place the person with diabetes in the center. It's not just the metabolic derangement that you look at. You look at the weight, you look at the cardiovascular protection, and the last column is the cardiorenal protection. So this is the latest guideline from the ADA, EASD. So I think in the post-COVID scenario, I think it's quite valid because COVID destroyed the beta cells. We had many new cases coming on. So I think this guidelines from the ADA and EASD are quite good, where you look at glycemic management, weight management, the cardiovascular protection, and cardiorenal benefit. So when you choose a drug, because we are a plethora of drugs today, when you choose a drug, have these 4 things in mind. Thank you.
Dr. Amrish, is there a need for a community level intervention also, or maybe at the policy level?
Sorry. I think there are several approaches to controlling the pandemic of diabetes that is threatening to engulf India. And I think the approaches can be upstream or downstream approaches. So upstream approaches is what you're talking about, the preventive strategies and policies. So it starts from there. So we need to give firstly, we need to have mothers who are properly nourished, pregnant women being both undernourished or obese, both increases the risk of diabetes in their offspring. Very important. Even undernourished women give rise to small babies, and when they actually put on weight later in life, they quickly become diabetic. So one is nutrition of the mother. Second is appropriate nutritional choices, awareness and availability to children and teenagers. Big challenge. We tell them, don't have this, don't have that. They ask us, what should we have? There's nothing available in our college. There is not much available in us. All the stuff that is available is the following. So we cannot let our youth flounder in trying to look for the appropriate dietary item. I think there are some things which have to be enforced rather than only educated about. And I think schools, etc., should be forced to ensure only healthy food is provided there. If we can reduce childhood obesity, we can reduce adult diabetes quite a bit. So very important that kind of ensuring nutrition for pregnant women throughout schooling, ensuring the appropriate kind of food. A lot of children have midday meals these days. Others may have, day schools where they have their meals in school. That is, I think, very, very important. And the choices that they buy around the school should also be more like fruits and other healthy options. We should just not have that. There should be a law to that. We should have heavy taxation on sugar sweetened beverages, SSBs as they call them, the colas and others. They should be far more expensive. Milk should be the cheapest thing available. Right now, colas are so cheap as compared to that. So there should be a sugar tax. I do believe there should be some way to discourage people from going on to those. So strategies like that will have to be thought through. And of course, at the end, we are making a lot of progress in tertiary care of diabetes. We are managing those conditions much better, eye and kidney and heart and liver. But that's the other end of the spectrum. We shouldn't reach there. The economy of the individuals, the family, society, and state cannot bear this burden of everyone getting treatment for their complications. And in between, I think it's one important point that I keep making every time is insurance for OPD, coverage for OPD treatment. OPD for us means outpatient treatment. So the problem is that you get reimbursed for a kidney transplant, but you don't get reimbursed for your day-to-day care of diabetes. So we need to awaken to that. We need to invest in that. We need to invest in chronic care, in prevention strategies, rather than only focus on the more glamorous and more exciting and the more dangerous, treatment of complications.
Right, Dr. Amrish, strategies from the individual level to the policy level at multiple levels, changes that need to be made. We are out of time, but I'd quickly take one closing remark from you, Kavita, in less than a minute. The post-pandemic scenario, what changes can be done? What kind of strategies can be put forward?
I think most important thing is to learn from this. I think the only positive thing that probably can come out of this pandemic, and nothing else, of course, everything else is negative, is the fact that we need to give more importance to our health and track it on a daily basis. So if this one lesson can come, it can be applied to everything. it can be applied to diabetes as well as other diseases. So tracking your health on a daily basis, not just your blood sugar levels, but everything else, making changes in the kind of food we are eating more at home. I mean, the way we were eating at home during the pandemic, what is the reason? I mean, there is no reason why we can continue to eat at home, the home cooked food. So sticking to the basic rules of eating, because understanding that why do we have to wait for a pandemic to wake up? Actually, come to think of it, diabetes is a much bigger epidemic than what Corona could ever have been. People just don't realize how badly spread out it is and how many people it is affecting and, killing, in fact. So the fact is that keeping one's body health paramount is one lesson I think post-pandemic everyone must not let go of.
Thank you so much, Kavita. I know what we've discussed so far is just the tip of the iceberg, and there's much more that we can learn from you all. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have. So we'll have to close the discussion here. I'll hand it over to my colleague Kumaran for the closing.
Thank you, Revati, for this wonderful discussion that we had with Dr. Amrish, Dr. Vijay, and Kavita. We have had around 40 questions, doctors, around this discussion that we have been having for an hour or so now. I'd like to take only one question for Kavita and one question for Dr. Vijay, because Dr. Amrish's questions have been covered completely in this session. So the one question that people are asking here, Ms. Kavita, is that I need to stop sugar. So what are the other alternatives to stop sugar? And how do I go for a no sugar lifestyle? So that's one of the biggest questions that a lot of people have asked us.
Okay, so one, I need to know if that person is a diabetic or a person just wants to go off sugar. I'm presuming that person is not a diabetic, so I'll answer like that. If you're a diabetic, then also you don't have to go completely off sugar. But if you're not a diabetic, then you just don't have to go off sugar completely. Your body needs sugar. We need a little bit of sugar in your diet. You have to choose your sugar right. Like I say for everything else, for grains, for fats, for proteins, you have to choose them right. Cut it down to size. If you've been having 4 cups of coffee with 1 teaspoon each time, probably you can come down to 2 cups of coffee with half a teaspoon each time. This is just one example. If you've been eating a lot of meat after every meal, maybe you could decide to eat meat twice a week. So these are the changes that you need to make, because going cold turkey, unless I know the reason why you're doing it, I would not advise. But cutting down sugar in a step-by-step fashion is what I would advise. And I would advise that to everybody, not just you. We eat too much sugar. And here we need to look at both the sugar we can look at, what we put in our food on our own, as well as hidden sugars. So become a label reading expert. That will, that is one skill that can actually save your life. So do that and your sugars will be in check.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. Dr. Amrish Mittal have to take a leave for his another prior appointments. Thank you, Dr. Amrish, for being here with us and having such a wonderful discussion with all of us. And we have had around 200 participants today asking us a lot of questions. I would like to take one last question to Dr. Vijay Vishwanathan. Doctor, one question that a lot of people have asked is, how do I know when I am diabetic exactly? What is the marker that tells me that I am diabetic? So, yeah. Yes, Doctor.
Mr. Kumaran, the International Diabetes Federation has done away with the word diabetic. It's a person living with diabetes.
Okay.
So how do you detect people living with diabetes? If your fasting blood sugar is more than 126, first criteria. Second criteria, if your HbA1c is above 6.5%. Third criteria, if you're doing an oral glucose tolerance test, if your 2-hour value is above 200. The fourth criteria, and that's my last criteria. So if you have a casual blood sugar more than 200 with frank symptoms,
okay,
right? So frank symptoms more than 200, HbA1c above 6.5, fasting more than 126, or post glucose more than 200. Any one is enough to make a diagnosis, and that person has diabetes until proved otherwise.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Vijay. Thank you so much. With this, we would come to the end of the session. We apologize for stretching the session for another 12 minutes. So thank you, Ms. Kavita. Thank you, Dr. Vijay, and thank you, my colleague Revati, for hosting this wonderful session. Thank you so much. Thank you, all participants. And this video and this entire discussion will be available on the YouTube of happiesthealth.com. And you can also view us on the entire social media of happiesthealth.com. And for more information on a lot of stories on diabetes, cardiology, and many other topics, please do visit happiesthealth.com. We also thank our sponsors for the webinar, Stevia Call, the Sweetness. And thank you so much for panelists being here, patiently taking time out of this entire session. Thank you.
So what is the link between obesity and type 2 diabetes? How does obesity trigger insulin resistance? Obesity is essentially an abnormal and unhealthy state of weight gain and has indirect and direct associations with diabetes. Primarily, an unhealthy diet and a lack of exercise could lead to obesity. Other factors such as irregular sleep patterns or lack of sleep, excessive mental stress, which are all modifiable factors, are responsible for obesity. There are other attributable factors which may not be modifiable, and these include genetic factors and a history of low birth weight. Having said that, these additional factors may not be of major consequence, provided the other factors are tackled directly by the patient. So how is obesity related to diabetes? An increase in the amount of total and relative percentage of body fat in the body can lead to insulin resistance. Insulin, as you know, is the hormone that is responsible for driving glucose into the cells. The presence of an increased percentage of body fat blocks some of the actions of insulin, thereby making it less effective in pushing glucose into the cells. Moreover, there is an increase in circulating free fatty acids in obese people, which adds to the insulin resistance. People who are overweight and obese may in general be less fit, meaning that their muscle mass is reduced. Good muscle mass has cellular receptors which are responsible for the uptake of glucose into the muscles. This may in part be deficient in patients who are overweight. This can be reversed through physical exercise. In those who have excessive mental stress, the stress hormones like cortisol are elevated, and parts of the brain called the hypothalamus have changes in function. This may increase the risk of obesity as well as that of diabetes. Once obesity becomes more severe, people with the increase in body mass have difficulty in moving around. They have an increased tendency for knee arthritis and back problems. With this lack of mobility again, quite naturally they burn much less glucose, which increases the chances of developing and worsening diabetes. High fructose corn syrup is an ingredient present in almost all processed junk food with an artificial flavors and additives. Is it actually the food item responsible for the global epidemic of obesity and diabetes? So high fructose corn syrup, in short HFCS, is also known as glucose fructose, isoglucose and glucose fructose syrup. It is a sweetener made from cornstarch. In the production of conventional corn syrup, the starch is broken down into glucose by enzymes. To make HFCS, the corn syrup is further processed by D-xylose isomerase to convert some of this glucose into fructose. When mass produced, it ends up being cheaper than traditional sugar, which is sucrose, as a sweetening additive. The conventional sugar that we have also consists of a combination of molecules of glucose and fructose. Since HFCS is more miscible than traditional sugar as a syrup, its usage is widespread. It is also used with honey as an adulterant in some commercial preparations. So essentially, the negative effects of regular sugar are also there with HFCS as well. Through some studies, it appears that the fructose content in artificial sweeteners may indirectly cause an increase in the presence of fatty liver. Fatty liver or non-alcoholic steatohepatitis is a common entity in those with obesity and diabetes. However, some studies have shown this appears to be more common in association with corn syrup related products. To say that corn syrup is the sole cause of the epidemic of diabetes and obesity across the world today is probably a bit overstated. However, we as people should understand that it is unhealthy, like the regular sugar, and products containing corn syrup should not be consumed in large quantities, such as confectioneries, beverages, and other manufactured food products. What has been the impact of obesity on the onset of type 2 diabetes in young people? Has there been a drastic dip in the onset of diabetes in the past few years as obesity has emerged as a major problem? To start with, the prevalence of diabetes in 1972, that is almost 50 years ago, was hardly around 1 to 2% of the population. It is well known that with the improvement in socioeconomic status of any country, the presence of easily available foodstuff, the shift towards using more rice and wheat products instead of millet, the increase in mechanized transport, the easy accessibility for communication and entertainment such as mobile phones and television, the lack of sleep and the increase in stress levels driven by modern ambition have all led to a negative impact on the metabolism of people. This in turn has led to an increase in the prevalence of diabetes and obesity in the population. Some cities in India have a prevalence of diabetes of more than 25% for people who live in cities who are more than 25 years of age. It would need a lot of proactive measures both at the person to person level as well as programs for schools, colleges and the community to prevent this from reaching the levels that certain Middle Eastern countries have, which is as high as 50% of the population above the age of 25. We also need to understand that in countries like India and other South Asian countries, one does not need to have frank obesity in terms of a gross increase in body mass index, which you know is BMI. It only involves an increase in the central obesity that we traditionally call the paunch to instill a higher chance of a person getting diabetes. Is it time for each country to establish a diabetes management task force that uses community-based programs to focus on food habits and anti-obesity campaigns in educational institutions and workplaces? A lot has been spoken over the last 20 years in terms of the growing endemicity of diabetes and obesity. There have been a multitude of awareness programs that have been instituted to attempt to ensure healthy lifestyle amongst the public. However, the only real solution is to institutionalize the strategy to have an impact on sorting out the problem of diabetes and obesity in preventing its exponential expansion. This would require a strong political will. From a developmental perspective, it will involve setting up a comprehensive program that targets school-going children, those in college, to increase their physical activity. The curriculum should be balanced to mandate sporting activities and outdoor recreations as part of the growth of the character of an individual. The overall impact of this would be that of well-rounded citizens who would lead healthier and happier lives with a relatively low risk of non-communicable disease in future. There should be an emphasis on town planning to encourage walking, cycling, and other activities that increase physical mobility. This is absolutely critical. At the end of the day, we should realize that whatever we do will have a transgenerational impact. The prevention of obesity in youth, particularly in women, will also lead to a reduction in other disorders like diabetes in pregnancy, which we know, if uncontrolled, can lead to an increase in the frequency of diabetes in the next generation, that's in the offspring. Therefore, it needs a concerted effort and collaboration between healthcare givers, the community, and the government to realize the dream of reducing the burden of non-communicable disease on a long-term basis.